The warship Sovereign Fong did not feel like a place where children should exist. It felt like a place built to harden adults into weapons and call that strength. Its corridors were wide, dark, and lined with black alloy ribs, conquered banners, and old victory marks burned into the metal. The air carried machine oil, hot steel, and the heavy territorial scent of too many Valrothi warriors sharing the same decks. Everything about the flagship told the same story. This was not a ship made for comfort. It was made for command. Jonah Reed had been aboard for 19 days, and the ship still felt less like a vessel and more like the inside of some giant armored beast. He stood near the outer wall of the Great Council chamber with a data slate in one hand, keeping his posture quiet and his expression neutral. Officially, he was a temporary human rescue medic and systems specialist assigned to juvenile stress response and emergency medical support. In reality, almost everyone in the room saw him as something much simpler. A tolerated outsider. Useful when something went wrong. Invisible when politics began. Jonah preferred it that way. Invisible people noticed things. Across the chamber, the high clan leaders of the Valrothi Empire were gathering in layered ceremonial armor and dark war cloaks. Their gold eyes caught the brazier light as they spoke in low growls and clipped formal phrases. Attendants moved between them carrying oath tablets, scent-marked ribbons, and legal symbols of legitimacy. The room was filling with rank, ritual, and the kind of tension that did not need raised voices to feel dangerous. Tonight was not an ordinary council. It was the first witness right of the ruling line. Jonah had already heard the law explained that morning. Before the heir reached his 7th season, he had to be publicly seen by the high clans during a full command assembly. Alive. Present. Protected beneath law. The custom was ancient, older than the empire itself, created in the time when rival bloodlines settled succession with killings and civil war. If the heir was not properly witnessed, then later someone strong enough could claim the line was weak, hidden, false, or open to challenge. At the center of that law sat the child carrying all of it. Kale Thane, son of Alpha Varric Thane, sat too straight on a carved stone seat beside the throne dais. He wore a formal black mantle that made him look official from a distance, but Jonah could still see how young he really was. His silver-gray fur had been brushed smooth for ceremony. His ears were held in rigid control. His chin stayed high. Yet his fingers kept flexing against the edge of the seat, and every time another clan lord entered with guards and ceremonial weapons, his shoulders tightened by another fraction. Jonah had only met him a few times, but that was enough. He knew the signs. The boy was exhausted, overstimulated, and trying very hard not to let anyone see it. His breathing was a little too shallow. His stillness was too perfect. He was spending all his strength on looking steady. A child, Jonah thought, sitting at the center of a machine that only understood power. Behind Kale stood Alpha Varric Thane. The ruler of the Sovereign Fong looked like the kind of being frontier stations invented stories about when they wanted children to obey safety locks. He was huge, scarred, and armored in dark blue-black plate with almost no ornament except the ruling sigil burned into the chest. When his eyes moved across the room, warriors lowered theirs. When those same eyes dropped to his son, something in the hard lines of his face eased by the smallest degree. Most people would have missed it. Jonah did not. That tiny change made the scene feel more dangerous, not less. Because this was not only a ruler presenting an heir to the empire. It was also a father trying to hold a political machine steady around a child too young to carry it. More clan leaders entered. Metal boots rang against the black floor. The chamber grew warmer, louder, thicker with ceremonial smoke and old tension. Jonah's eyes returned to Kale again. The boy had not moved, but that was the problem. He looked less like a calm heir and more like someone holding himself together one breath at a time. The rite had not even begun. And already Jonah felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong this room would notice. Not yet. The chamber kept filling, and with every new arrival the pressure around Kale tightened by another invisible turn. More armored clan lords entered beneath the hanging banners, followed by attendants carrying tablets, guards carrying ceremonial blades, and advisors wearing the controlled expressions of people who knew a child's public composure could decide the future of bloodlines. No one said that aloud. They did not need to. The whole room already acted like it. Jonah stayed where he was near the outer wall, silent, watchful, and increasingly certain that the air was much closer to the edge than anyone important understood. Kale's posture remained straight, but the details were changing. His fingers flexed more often against the carved arm of the seat. His shoulders locked tighter whenever another noble bowed too low or too long. His breathing, shallow before, now barely seemed to reach his ribs at all. To the rest of the chamber, that stillness probably looked like discipline. To Jonah, it looked like a child trying not to disappear in public. He had seen it before on rescue stations, hospital decks, and evacuation corridors. Adults always praised the quiet children first. They called them brave, mature, well-behaved. Then, half an hour later, those same children folded in on themselves somewhere no one expected. Panic did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived wearing perfect manners. Kale's ears gave him away next. S jaw tightened. A clan lord in heavy shoulder armor laughed at something near the lower rail, and Jonah saw the boy's claws press briefly into the stone before easing away. Not rebellion. Not disrespect. Overload. Jonah glanced toward the lower steps of the dais where Matron Surith stood with her staff resting against the floor. She looked exactly as she had that morning. Severe, controlled, and carved from the same old law she served. If she noticed the strain in the air, she gave no sign. Neither did the attendants flanking the throne. Neither did the clan leaders. All of them were watching Kale, but none of them were really seeing him. They were seeing witness. Legitimacy. Succession. Power. Symbol. That was the problem. Children broke faster when rooms stopped treating them like people. A low voice from the dais pulled Jonah's attention back upward. Alpha Varric had leaned slightly toward his son again. This time Jonah caught more of it. "Do not bare your teeth if Lord Dre challenges the wording," the Alpha said quietly. Kale kept his eyes forward. What if he deserves it? A nearby attendant froze for half a second, pretending not to hear. Varric's mouth shifted with the faintest trace of amusement. Then you may imagine it vividly and remain silent. For the smallest instant, the exchange softened the space around them. Not enough to make it safe. Just enough to remind Jonah that beneath all this iron ritual, there was still a father trying to steady a son through something too heavy for him. Kale muttered something Jonah almost missed. Silence is difficult. Ruling is mostly difficult things done slowly, Varric replied. Jonah looked down at his slate to hide the fact that the line landed harder than he expected. It sounded too human. Too familiar. Too much like something said in a hospital corridor by a tired parent pretending their own fear had not already reached the bone. Around them, the room swelled with sound. Final clan leaders were taking position now. Metal boots rang against the black floor. Braziers breathed heat into air already crowded with scent and politics. Jonah looked up again and saw Kale's shoulders tighten another fraction. That was it. The boy was nearing threshold. Jonah considered crossing the room, saying something to an attendant, suggesting a short pause, water, air, any excuse to break the pressure before it snapped. But he already knew how that would go. The air was in position. The rite was about to begin. Law had momentum now. No one would interrupt ancient custom because a tolerated human medic thought the child at the center of it looked overstimulated. Then Matron Surith stepped fully onto the lower dais and struck her staff once. The chamber settled. "Let all present witness," she began. Jonah's eyes moved to Kale one more time, and a cold certainty settled in his chest. The rite was starting. And the air was already drowning before anyone important had even noticed. Matron Surith stepped onto the lower dais and struck her staff once. The chamber settled. Then she began the formal witness rite, calling Kale Thane, son of Varric Thane, blood of the living line, before Fong, oath, and command. It was the official beginning of the ceremony. But Jonah was not focused on the law. He was focused on Kale. Kale was still in place, but the strain Jonah had noticed earlier was now clearer. The boy was holding himself together, but only just. His shoulders were tight. His fingers flexed against the seat edge. Every time another clan lord entered or looked at him too long, he seemed to lock down even more. Jonah no longer merely suspected the air was near his limit. He was sure of it. Then the heavy side door opened. Every head turned. Commander Dravik entered with 6 retainers and the kind of measured apology powerful men used when they wanted everyone to notice they had been delayed by matters above ordinary importance. He bowed to the Alpha, but not deeply enough to be respectful and not shallowly enough to be challenged. Jonah saw the effect of him at once. Kale's shoulders went rigid. His claws pressed into the stone seat. The room's balance changed immediately. Jonah did not know Dravik well, but he knew the type. Too smooth. Too interested in rules when rules could be used like weapons. Dravik's gaze flicked once toward Kale, and the boy looked away so fast it felt like a flinch disguised as discipline. Jonah felt his skin prickle. He leaned toward the nearest attendant and murmured, "Has the air had a break?" The attendant blinked, surprised that the human had spoken. "A break." Jonah kept his voice low. "Food. Quiet. Space away from all this." The attendant looked scandalized. "He is in right position." Jonah glanced back at Kale, the tight jaw, the too still body, the bright overwhelmed eyes, and said softly, "Yeah, that's what I was afraid of." Then Surath called for the formal witness standing. A small ripple of movement followed. Jonah looked toward the throne seat again. Kale was no longer there. The silence after Jonah realized the seat was empty lasted less than a heartbeat. But inside that heartbeat, the entire chamber changed shape. A moment earlier it had been ritual, posture, law, and carefully arranged dominance. Now it was danger, immediate and impossible to disguise. Surath stopped mid-sentence. Alpha Varric Thane's hand snapped to the back of the carved seat and found nothing there. Several clan lords half rose at once, not out of concern, but calculation. Jonah saw that too. A missing child was one kind of crisis. A missing heir in the middle of a formal witness rite was another. That was succession panic. That was challenge, scandal, bloodline weakness, and possible civil fracture, all wrapped around a child too young to carry any of it. "Where is he?" Varric's voice did not rise, but the chamber reacted as if he had struck every wall at once. Guards moved instantly. Attendants backed away from the dais. Commander Dravik turned sharply, his expression arranged into alarm just a fraction too slowly for Jonah's liking. Then Dravik barked, "Seal the chamber. No one leaves." "No," Jonah said before he could stop himself. The word cut across the room so strangely that several heads turned toward him in surprise. Varric's eyes found him at once. "Explain, human." Jonah stepped forward, data slate still in hand, pulse kicking hard in his throat, but his mind clearing with the speed it always did when other people were panicking in the wrong direction. If Kale left because he was frightened, sealing every exit and turning this into a hunt will push him farther into hiding. He's not an assassin. He's overloaded. A low growl rolled from one of the lesser clan chiefs. "You presume much." Jonah did not look at him. "I notice things. That's why your medical division kept me." Matron Surath descended from the dais with controlled speed, her staff clicking once against the black floor. "State your observations." Jonah pointed toward the empty seat. He was already at threshold before the rite started. Rapid breath. Locked shoulders. Auditory overload. Repeated hand tension. Then Commander Dravik arrived late. Everyone shifted posture, and the room got louder and tighter all at once. He didn't run because he's disobedient. He ran because this chamber stopped feeling survivable. Dravik's gaze hardened by 1 degree. "You dare suggest my arrival frightened the ruling heir?" Jonah met his stare for the first time. "I'm suggesting the kid was drowning before anyone noticed, and then the wave got bigger." Varric did not rebuke him. That mattered more than agreement said aloud. The Alpha turned to the chamber. "Lock the external hangars, the weapons decks, and all live-fire sectors. Keep the main internal routes open." Several guards hesitated. That was not standard missing air protocol. It was not domination. It was search logic. Jonah took the opening immediately. He won't go somewhere grand. He'll go somewhere quieter than this. Smaller. Mechanical, maybe. Somewhere with only 1 or 2 exits. Suratha's ears flicked once. You speak as though you have done this before. Jonah gave a brief, humorless breath. Different species. Same nervous system story. What followed was not orderly, no matter how much the chamber tried to pretend otherwise. The Sovereign Fong went into silent lockdown. Doors sealed in the outer command sectors. Patrol nodes lit across the lower decks. Search teams split into pairs and trios so the corridors would not feel like military sweeps if Kale saw them coming. The clan lords remained inside the council chamber under formal watch, which only made the air there more poisonous. Jonah could feel suspicion breeding by the second. If the heir was not found quickly, somebody would say he had been taken. If he had been taken, somebody would say a rival clan allowed it. If that spread, old grievances would rise fast. Jonah moved through the upper service corridors on his second search circuit when a young palace page assigned to ceremonial linens nearly collided with him at a corner and then froze. "I'm sorry," the page blurted. "I was told to search the East Observatory." Jonah caught the boy gently by the forearm before he bolted again. "Did you see Kale before he vanished?" The page swallowed. "Not vanish. Earlier. Before the right, he asked me where the quiet vents were." Jonah's mind snapped into place. What exactly did he say? He asked where the ship was least loud. Jonah closed his eyes for half a second. Of course. Not where could he hide. Where was the ship least loud? "And what did you tell him?" The page looked miserable. "I thought he was joking. I said maintenance crescent on deck 9, because no nobles ever go there." Jonah was already moving. He keyed the local search net. Possible direction confirmed. Deck 9 maintenance crescent. Low traffic. Reduced lighting. Thermal ducts probably shielded from main ceremony noise. Varric's voice came back first over the channel. "I am en route." "No, sir." Jonah answered at once. A dangerous pause followed. Jonah kept going. If he's there because he needed the ship to stop being too much, then a full royal escort arriving in armor will make him bolt again. Send one guard to hold the junctions. "Let me go first." Another pause. Longer this time. Jonah could imagine the alpha weighing instinct against result. "Surath goes with you," Varric said at last. "And if my son is harmed?" "He's not," Jonah said more firmly than rank should have allowed. "He's hiding, not hurt. There's a difference." The channel closed. Deck 9 waited below, quiet and mechanical. And Jonah was now almost certain that if they found Kale, they would find him exactly where the rest of the ship finally stopped asking him to be a symbol. Deck 9's maintenance crescent felt like another ship entirely. The ceilings were lower. The walls were bare alloy broken only by service panels and humming conduit lines. The air smelled of coolant, warm circuits, and recycled heat instead of incense, fur, and politics. Every few meters, a status lamp glowed soft white instead of the harsh ceremonial gold from the upper decks. The whole place felt quieter, smaller, and less demanding. Jonah slowed as soon as he entered, forcing his own footsteps quieter. Matron Surath matched him with surprising grace for someone wrapped in ritual iron and judgment. "If you are wrong," she murmured, "the chamber above us begins to rot." Jonah glanced at her. "Then let's be right quickly." They passed a half-open storage alcove, a maintenance ladder well, and a drone charging bay. Then Jonah heard it. Not crying. Not movement exactly. A small rhythmic scraping sound from farther down the crescent, near the thermal inspection crawl space. Jonah lifted one hand to stop Surath. "Stay here." "You presume much, human Reed." "Yeah," Jonah whispered. "But right now, I'm presuming quieter than armor." He stepped forward alone, rounded the bend slowly, and saw a small black ceremonial mantle crumpled on the floor outside an open service hatch. Jonah's chest tightened. He crouched beside it, reached toward the dim opening beyond, and spoke in the calmest voice he had. "Kale," he said softly. "It's Jonah. I think you stole a whole warship's worth of attention." From somewhere inside the hatch came a very small, very tired voice. "I didn't steal it. They threw it at me." Jonah stayed exactly where he was, crouched beside the opening with one hand resting on the cold deck plating and the other deliberately empty where Kale could see it. The maintenance crescent hummed softly around them, warm ducts and steady machine noise, the kind of sound that did not demand anything from anyone. That was probably why the boy had chosen it. Thrown at you, Jonah repeated gently. Yeah, that sounds more accurate. Inside the hatch, two pale gold eyes caught the low light and disappeared again. Are you going to make me come out? Kale asked. The question carried more exhaustion than defiance. Jonah looked back once toward Surith, who stood where he had left her, rigid as carved stone and, for once, wise enough to stay silent. Then he returned his attention to the hatch. No, he said. I'm going to sit here and talk to you until you decide what you want to do. A pause followed. That's not very official. Jonah eased himself down onto the deck outside the hatch and stretched his legs out in front of him. Good. Because official is what sent you into a ventilation crawl space. That almost earned him a laugh, if Kale had not been too tired to finish the motion. Matron Surith says a future alpha does not hide. Matron Surith has probably never had 12 clan lords stare at her like she was a border treaty with legs. Kale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the careful honesty of the very young, they weren't looking at me like a person. Jonah nodded, even though the child could only see part of him. No. They were looking at what you mean. That's a heavy thing to wear when you're 6. I am nearly 7. My mistake. Ancient and battle-hardened. This time the small laugh did come, quick and tired and surprising both of them. Jonah heard the faintest click of disapproval from Surith in the corridor behind him, but she did not interrupt. Kale shifted inside the shaft. Jonah could hear cloth against metal and the small restless scrape of claws against the maintenance grid. If I stood there wrong, Kale said softly, Lord Dre would challenge wording. If I looked afraid, Commander Dravik would remember it. If I answered too fast, Matron Surith would correct me. If I answered too slowly, Father would know I was frightened in front of all of them. And then Dravik came in. There was. Jonah kept his tone easy. You don't like Dravik. Silence. Then, very quietly, he smiles with no warmth in his scent. Jonah filed the phrase away. Kids notice things adults dressed up in politics. What happened when he came in? Jonah asked. Kale did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone flatter, smaller, as if he were replaying something that did not fit inside him properly. He leaned near Matron Surith before the rite started. He thought I could not hear because everyone else was making noise. He said, once the witness is complete, the line is harder to move. Jonah's shoulders went still. Behind him, Surith made a sharp intake of breath. Did he say anything else? Jonah asked. Not all of it. I heard timing and claimants, and if the child falters in public, then Father turned and Dravik stopped talking. Kale shifted again. I did not know what it meant. I still don't. But I knew I was suddenly colder. Jonah let the quiet sit for a second. Then he said, that was a very good reason to trust your instincts. Everyone else says heirs should ignore fear. Jonah answered with complete seriousness. That is stupid advice. Fear is useful. Panic is the problem. You didn't panic. You got out of a room that felt wrong. Kale thought about that. Matron Surith will hate that answer. She hates most answers that aren't carved into stone. Again the almost laugh. More importantly, Jonah heard the shift in Kale's breathing. Slower now. Less brittle. They sat like that for another minute, the warship humming around them while search teams moved somewhere far above, trying not to turn worry into disaster. Jonah did not crowd the hatch. He did not ask for promises. He simply stayed. Finally, Kale spoke again. Are they angry? Jonah answered honestly. Yes. The boy went still. But not at you, Jonah added. Father will be. Your father is terrified. He is Alpha Varric Thane and also your father. Those things can happen at the same time. Another long silence followed. Then, at last, Kale emerged. He crawled out of the service hatch on hands and knees in wrinkled ceremonial black, fur dusty with vent grime, ears drooping with exhaustion, and one of the gold fasteners from his mantle missing entirely. Jonah took in the sight and, against all better judgment, said, "You look like you lost a fight with a laundry cart." Kale blinked at him, offended for exactly half a second, then slumped down beside the wall with all the fragile self-control of a child who had spent too many hours being watched and judged and could no longer hold himself upright under the effort. "I am not going back yet," he muttered. "Okay. You are supposed to argue." "No. I'm supposed to keep you from bolting into another vent shaft." Kale stared at Jonah as if this were a novel leadership style. Then his gaze dropped to Jonah's boots, black shipboard leather planted squarely on the deck like they had nowhere else to be. Jonah saw the moment the child's body made the choice before his mind did. Kale shifted closer, then closer still, until his shoulder touched Jonah's shin. He hesitated in embarrassment. Jonah did not move, did not speak, did not make the moment bigger than it was. After another second, Kale gave up pretending he was not tired, curled against Jonah's leg, rested one hand lightly across the toe of Jonah's boot as if checking that it was real, and fell asleep so fast it felt less like sleep and more like collapse. Jonah sat absolutely still. He could hear Matron Surith approaching now in measured silence. He could feel the whole warship's panic still coiled somewhere beyond this quiet little crescent. But he did not look up until she stopped beside him and saw the sleeping heir for herself. Her expression changed so subtly most people would have missed it. Shock first. Then relief so deep it almost looked like pain. Jonah kept his voice barely above a whisper. "Told you he needed quieter than armor." Surith stared down at Kale, curled beside a human's boots in a patch of warm maintenance light, one small hand still gripping the leather as if he had finally found the only steady thing on the whole ship. When she answered, her voice had lost all its ceremonial iron. "Do not move," she said. "I am going to bring his father." She returned faster than Jonah expected, and she did not come alone. The maintenance crescent, which had felt like the quiet edge of the universe a minute earlier, suddenly held the controlled gravity of people powerful enough to move panic without shouting. Alpha Varric Thane came first, still in full council armor, his strides heavy and silent despite the plating. Behind him came two elite guards who stopped the instant they saw Suritha's raised hand. Terrell was with them too, breath uneven from the sprint, one bandaged wing tucked tight against his side. No one spoke at first. They all saw the same thing. The missing heir of the ruling line, who had brought the flagship to silent lockdown and left half the War Council imagining assassination, was asleep on the floor in a warm patch of maintenance light with one hand curled around Jonah Reed's boot. Jonah had seen battlefield triage rooms go still before. He had seen rescue corridors hold their breath while someone decided whether a child would live or die. This silence felt stranger, more intimate. It was the silence of hard people being forced to witness a truth they had somehow missed in public view. Varric's face did not change at once, but something in the set of his shoulders did. A fraction of tension left him so suddenly that Jonah realized the Alpha had been holding his entire body like a weapon for however long it had taken to search the ship. Surith stepped carefully to one side and lowered her voice. "He is unharmed." Varric did not take his eyes off Kale. "I can see that." Terrell, who had likely expected blood, sabotage, or at least tears, stared at Jonah as if the human had somehow performed sorcery through inaction. Jonah lifted one hand in the smallest possible warning. "Please do not make this dramatic," he whispered. He crashed hard. If he wakes to armor, voices, and 12 people trying to claim him at once, he'll run again. One of the guards looked offended by the instruction. Varric silenced him with the smallest motion of 2 fingers. Then the Alpha did something no one there had expected. He lowered himself slowly to one knee several paces away from his son, not crowding him, not reaching for him, simply making himself less immense. Jonah noticed Surith notice it too. "How long has he been asleep?" Varric asked. "Less than 5 minutes," Jonah answered quietly. He held himself together through the whole right lead-up, through the council atmosphere, through whatever Dravik said near the dais, and through however long he was hiding in the service shaft. Once he felt safe, the system shut down. Terrell's gaze sharpened. "Dravik." Varric looked up sharply. Jonah nodded once. Kale heard something. Not enough to fully understand it. Enough to know the room got colder when Commander Dravik arrived. Suratha's grip tightened around her staff, but she kept her voice measured. That can wait until the child wakes. No, Varric said. It can wait until the child is stable. That was a different sentence entirely, and Jonah noticed that too. More people began to collect at the far mouth of the maintenance crescent, drawn by SearchNet updates and the simple gravitational pull of the air being found. Jonah could hear them before he saw them. Boots slowing. Voices dropping. Questions dying in throats. A pair of young attendants peered around the corner and then quickly looked down when they saw Kale asleep beside a human's boots like a pup who had finally found the one place on the ship that did not want anything from him. Jonah remained very still instead. Kale had shifted after falling asleep. One ear lay flattened against Jonah's shin. His breathing was deep. And even now, one small hand still gripped the leather at Jonah's ankle, as if somewhere in sleep he remained unconvinced the quiet would stay unless he physically held on to it. He chose you, Surath said at last. The words sounded more like an accusation than praise. Jonah kept his eyes on the child. No. He chose the first place on this ship that wasn't trying to turn him into a symbol. Terrell gave a short breath through his teeth. Careful, human. Jonah looked up at him just long enough to answer. I am being careful. If I weren't, I'd say half your court noticed the right and none of you noticed the kid. That should have earned him at least a warning and maybe a formal reprimand. But no one in the Crescent had the energy to pretend he was wrong. Varric was still watching Kale, his expression stripped down to something much simpler than command. Father, Jonah thought. Just father now. Why you? Varric asked quietly. It was not a hostile question. If anything, it sounded like the one thing he truly did not understand. Jonah answered honestly because there was no useful lie here. I didn't push him. I didn't bow. I didn't ask him to be impressive. I listened. That is all. When someone's drowning in noise, all can be a lot. That seemed to land somewhere deep. Varric looked away first, which in that corridor might as well have been an admission. Kale woke the way frightened children often did after collapsing from exhaustion. Not with a jolt, but with a slow return to the world, the body surfacing before the mind agreed to follow. His fingers tightened once around Jonah's boot, then relaxed. One ear flicked. His eyes opened a slit, unfocused at first, then widened as he realized the maintenance crescent was no longer just him and Jonah and the warm hum of the ship. There were shadows now. Armor. Witnesses. Jonah felt the moment panic threatened and spoke before it could fully rise. Easy, he said quietly. Nobody rushed you. See. Kale's gaze jumped from Jonah to Surath to Terrell and finally to Varric, kneeling a careful distance away. His ears flattened. I left, he said hoarsely. Shame arrived before memory fully had. Yes, Varric said, his voice rougher than before. You did. Kale looked down, bracing for anger that never came. After a moment he said in a smaller voice, I know the right matters. It does. And I made it weak. That was when Jonah saw something pass through Varric's face that no council lord above would ever be permitted to witness. Clean and immediate. No, the Alpha said. You made it honest. Kale blinked, confused enough to look up. Varric exhaled slowly through his nose. And that failure is mine before it is yours. Surath looked as though someone had just rewritten one of her sacred tablets in front of her, but she did not interrupt. Kale's hand loosened from Jonah's boot at last, though he did not move away. Instead, he leaned against Jonah's leg and asked the question that had probably mattered to him more than law, or shame, or politics. Am I in trouble? Jonah answered before anyone else could make it ceremonial. You're in maintenance dust and missing half your formal dignity. But no, I don't think trouble made the final list. Kale huffed a small, tired laugh. Then he pointed not at his father, not at Surath, not at the guards, but at Jonah. He was quiet, he said. Because he was still only a child, that was apparently explanation enough for the ruling line of a war empire. Strangely, it was enough for Jonah too. The Crescent fell silent again, but this time it was not panic. It was recognition. And somewhere far above them in the council chamber, Commander Dravik was still waiting. Kale did not want to return to the council chamber, which Jonah thought was probably the healthiest instinct anyone had displayed all night. Unfortunately, the Sovereign Fong was still carrying an active right, a room full of armed clan leaders, and a commander who had become much more interesting in exactly the wrong way. So the maintenance crescent could not remain a sanctuary forever. Varric rose first, slower than Jonah expected for someone built like a siege engine, and crouched just enough to meet his son's eyes without towering over him again. "Kale," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me what you heard." The boy's ears shifted back. "This? In front of everyone?" "Not everyone." Varric turned his head. "Clear the crescent. Sirith, Terrell, the human. No one else." There was a brief ripple of surprise at Jonah still being included, but no one dared argue. Within seconds, the corridor emptied, leaving only the low hum of ductwork, the 4 adults, and the child still half-curled beside Jonah's leg. Kale looked from one face to the next, then down at the deck. "Commander Dravik spoke to one of his officers before the rite started," he said at last. "He thought I was listening to Matron Surith. I was. But I was also listening to him." Suritha's expression tightened by degrees. "What words did you hear exactly?" Kale frowned in concentration. "Not all of them. Once the witness is complete, the line becomes harder to move." Then the other one asked, "And if the child falters before that?" He swallowed. Dravik said, "Then the chamber will see weakness in its own light. Then I heard claimants and timing, and the mother clans will turn if fear is seen openly." I did not understand all of it, but I understood they were waiting for something bad to happen to me while everyone watched. Terrell swore under his breath. Varric said nothing. That silence was worse. Jonah felt the logic settle into place all at once. Not assassination. Not kidnapping. Something cleaner and crueler. Public collapse. Public failure. Make the air break during the first witness rite, and the memory would stain him before law ever had the chance to protect him. He wanted Kale to panic in front of the chamber, Jonah said quietly. Suritha's eyes flashed. Terrell's jaw tightened. Varric finally moved. He did not roar. He did not bare his teeth. He simply straightened, and when he spoke, the words came out cold enough to frost metal. "He used my son as a succession lever." Kale looked up quickly. "I left before he could." Varric's expression shifted for a second. Pride, pain, fury. "Yes," he said. "You did." Jonah should have stayed quiet after that. Human medics were not supposed to insert themselves into the succession law of apex predator empires. But he had spent enough years around panicked children and ugly adults to know when everyone in a room was about to make the worst possible choice because anger felt simpler than thinking. "If you storm back in and accuse Dravik outright, you play into his hand," he said. Terrell turned first. "Explain." Jonah leaned back against the wall without moving far enough to make Kale think he was being abandoned. Right now Dravik knows only one thing for certain. The air vanished in the middle of the rite. If Kale walks back in shaken and you come in furious, Dravik gets what he wanted anyway. The chamber smells weakness, confusion, and a father acting from panic. Best case, he loses cleanly. Worst case, he loses and still leaves the idea behind. Suritha's grip tightened on her staff. "You are suggesting we pretend none of this happened." "No," Jonah said. "I'm suggesting you let him think he nearly got away with it until he steps forward far enough to hang himself with his own confidence." Varric's eyes settled on him. "How?" "By finishing the rite." Terrell stared at him as if he had suggested setting the ship on fire to improve ventilation. Surith spoke first. "The rite has already been broken." "No," Jonah said. "Interrupted and broken are not the same. You still have the air. You still have the chamber. And unless your law says a 6-year-old is forbidden from needing air, Dravik can't openly challenge a pause without sounding like exactly what he is." Surith did not answer immediately. Finally she said, grudgingly, "No law forbids interruption by distress or biological necessity." "Good," Jonah said. "Then use that. Bring Kale back in calm, not dragged. Don't make him look like prey recovered from hiding. Make him look like the heir who stepped out because the chamber was not worthy of his attention yet." Terrell's mouth opened slightly. That is manipulative. Jonah shrugged. So is politics. Humans just admit it more often. To Jonah's surprise, Kale was the one who spoke next. I could do that. All three adults turned toward him. The boy pushed himself upright, rubbed one eye with the back of his hand, and looked suddenly very much like the child he was and the future ruler he might become at the same time. If I go back, Kale said, Dravik will watch my face. Varric crouched again. Yes. Kale's ears tilted thoughtfully. Then I want to watch his. When they re-entered the Great Council chamber, the room felt different. It still held the same armored clan lords, the same banners, the same braziers breathing ceremonial scent into the air. But now every eye went first to Varric, then to Kale walking beside him, and finally to the human standing half a pace behind the lower dais as if he had somehow been folded into a sacred proceeding through sheer accident and stubborn timing. A little dust still clung to the hem of Kale's mantle. Let them see it had been real. Surith struck her staff once. The first witness right resumes under interruption clause. The heir stands present, unharmed, and uncoerced. Let any who question legitimacy now do so before oath and command. Dravik stepped forward anyway. Then I question the strength of the interruption. A ruling line that cannot hold its own heir steady through first witness invites concern from every mother clan sworn to the stability of this worship. Varric did not answer him. Surith did not answer him. To Jonah's surprise, Kale did. The boy took one measured step forward. Commander Dravik, he said clearly. Did you mean concern when you told your officer, once the witness is complete, the line becomes harder to move? The chamber went perfectly still. Dravik's expression did not collapse, but one ear twitched back before he caught it. You are a child. You misheard tension and adult speech. Kale did not look at his father. He looked only at Dravik. Then perhaps I also misheard if the child falters before that, and the chamber will see weakness in its own light. Now the chamber truly moved. Heads turned. Scent shifted. Terrell raised one hand, and two internal guards stepped from the side arch with a kneeling officer between them. Dravik's officer, the one Kale had heard him speaking to before the rite. Terrell's voice stayed flat. This officer attempted to transmit a sealed challenge petition to 3 mother clans while the heir was missing. Time-stamped before interruption clause was even invoked. Surith took the slate, read it once, then again. The petition was drafted 6 hours before assembly. It cites anticipated public instability during witness and recommends temporary succession review under emergency confidence law. A soft, ugly laugh came from one of the upper tiers. Another voice murmured, he came prepared to call weakness before weakness existed. Dravik tried one last time. Overzealous subordinates do not become treason because they are clumsy. Varric descended from the throne dais then, and the chamber's noise died on instinct. He did not go to Dravik first. He went to his son. Surith straightened and spoke the old law. What is the first duty of the Alpha? Kale answered carefully, dust still on his hem, sleep still softening one side of his face. The first duty of the Alpha is to know the difference between fear and weakness. Fear tells you where harm is. Weakness is when you use someone else's fear to move them where you want. A ruler who needs that is not strong enough to lead. No one spoke after that. Surith struck her staff once. Witness sealed. Challenge against the ruling line denied and reversed. Commander Dravik, you stand under immediate internal review for premeditated succession manipulation during sacred assembly. Guards moved before Dravik could recover enough dignity to wear it. The pressure in the chamber eased. Varric placed one hand on Kale's shoulder in full view of everyone, not as control, but as recognition. Then he turned his head. Human Reed, step forward. Jonah obeyed. Kale solved whatever answer he might have given by reaching out and catching 2 of Jonah's fingers in his own. It was not grand. It was practical. Honest. Varric's voice carried cleanly through the hall. From this day, Jonah Reed of Earth will have free passage to all inner decks of Sovereign Fong by my word. He is under pack protection while aboard this vessel. Jonah managed, that seems excessive for a systems medic. One corner of Varric's mouth moved. Kale looked up at Jonah and said, very simply, "You did not leave the dais." Jonah squeezed the small hand gently. "Told you I wouldn't."